Tonight, what I want to do is actually compile 12 weeks of teaching in the space of the time that we have, and we're starting really late. And I've really been praying for like 3 days. What the heck do I say? Where do I begin? Because I knew that I wasn't going to do what I could normally do. So I have prayed the parts that I'm supposed to say I'm going to share with you. And I've got everything's in my book, and if you want a copy, I brought a few with me. But I want to begin by reading something out of my book and begin to consider whatever stage that you're in right now with children. Consider these words. Why are we here? Is the magical age of 18 a launching pad into adolescent expectation, or the benchmark of failed parental skills, leading to a future devoid of family support and relationships? We need one another. If we get it right while our kids are growing up, our future years will be filled with shared family values and not dysfunctional longings for what could have been. And this is key. We're given 18 years to shape the lives of those who will follow in our footsteps. Not a minute can be wasted. Not an opportunity can be lost. For just this reason, the daunting task of raising children can be frightening and intimidating, not just for soon-to-be parents, but also for parents in all seasons of child rearing. I want to just list to you the 12 topicals in my book. And I'm going to jump all over the place and try to get through some of these. Chapter number 1, just tell me that it's not too late. The most important person in my life, my dad. That's not to leave you moms out, because you're really important also. I can explain that. Disconnected fathers and rebellious sons. Number 4, the issue of authority. Chapter 5, family traditions. Chapter 6, the dangers of growing up in a Christian home. Mentoring, the road to manhood. The purpose of mid-course corrections. Becoming the priest of your home that God intends you to be. Chapter 11, where are you, God? And chapter 12, it's time to sing a new song. There are 3 areas I want to touch upon tonight. Relationships being redeemed, broken hearts being restored, and thirdly, preparation to what it means to be a parent. Thank you. This is rather interesting. Times have really changed. And for those of you that are a little bit maybe older than 25 or 30, you can appreciate this. How moms today say things. That word is inappropriate. How my mom said it, say that again, I'm going to wash out your mouth with soap. Secondly, good job of trying one bite of the dinner I made. Now you can have macaroni and cheese. My mother would have said, you'll eat what I make whether you like it or not. There's starving children in the world. Thirdly, I can see you're upset. Just take a deep breath and consider your words. You better stop crying or I'll give you something really to cry about. That was my mom. Not really. My mom was too kind to be that way, but maybe my grandmother. You can walk around the block, number 4, by yourself. I'll drive you. Text me when you need a ride back. Mom then. You want to go out? Take your bike and be home by dark. I remember a day of literally getting up in the morning at 9 o'clock and going out to play and playing baseball all day long on the streets and coming home when the lights go off. Today, you really can't do it that way. Some time ago, a young man walked into our church, and I'll never forget it. He had bedraggled clothes on. He's about 18 years old, very angry, very just filled with a lot of pain. And so I met him, and I found out that he was sleeping under a bridge in our community. I asked him where he lived, and he didn't know where he lived because he hadn't lived any place for a long time. He'd run away from home, didn't even know where his parents were. We took him in, to make a very long story short. I got him a place to stay with 2 of our college students, and they took care of him as much as they could. But he needed so much. He needed somebody to take a hold of him and to help him understand what life was all about. I'll never forget, I was flying to California to speak at my old church where I'd gone to seminary. Before I left that morning, I knew in my heart, call John, check on him. But I didn't do it. Halfway out to California, I thought, again, I got to call him as soon as I get out to Anaheim. I got to Anaheim and there was a call waiting for me back in the day when there weren't cell phones. But it was the two college kids that were taking care of him. They found him dead in the basement. He sniffed glue, which back in the day was the drug. He put a plastic bag over his head and left it on too long. And they found him dead. By the time I got home, he'd been cremated. His ashes were thrown to the wind. A young boy, 18 years old, with all the potential, who could become somebody, who was meant to be somebody. Now he was gone, and all the dreams, all the aspirations were out the door. That did something to me. And though my focus has always been on young people, with his death, I made a commitment that God, if you give me the opportunity and the time and the places to be able to do this, I want to reach out to young people. I want to reach and impact the Johns of the world that are going through these kind of things. I can't tell you how many times I'm stopped in church by a mother weeping and pulling me aside with the same story. You're not going to believe what my son did. You're not going to believe what my daughter got into. I left to come out here last week, and it's something for me even very hard to talk about. But a young man in our church, 5 children, they were new to our church about 8 or 10 months. We got to know them really well. And he had issues, and my son was working with him in a class that we teach called Freedom. We were going to try to get him into the class. Last week on Monday, his wife called, and she'd gone to work. The 5 kids were out, wherever, school, nursery. He took a gun and shot himself in the head and took his life. Didn't leave a message. Did it at home. And you can imagine the pain. And our whole church was just completely racked with pain for the last week and a half. But that's this generation. But it doesn't have to be that way. And those of you that are parents, about to be parents, dream of being parents, God through His Word has given you an opportunity that not what could have been, but what can be in the future that He has for you. Psalm 78 out of the Message Bible is very interesting. And God commanded our parents to teach His Word to the children so the next generation would know, and all the generations to come, they would know the truth and tell the stories so their children could trust in God and never forget His works, but keep His commandments to the letter. Then the writer says, heaven forbid they should be like their parents, bullheaded, bad, fickle, and faithless, a faithless bunch who never stay true to God. Maybe you had parents like that. If their parents are here, don't look at them and say, yeah, the guy's right. But maybe you've grown up that way, or maybe you've seen examples of that kind of parenting, where the parents don't really take charge, and they let things just happen, and hoping things turn out okay. Today, parenting is a tough job. And I want to show a video clip back there, George, of the crazy mom. And I want you to watch this and just think for a second. Do you know moms like this? Parents who, instead of instilling discipline and order in a child's life, will do this.
Sweetheart, turn off the TV now. It's time to go to school. Come on, Mommy's got to go to work. Come on, let's go. Teal. Sweetheart, I said it already once now. Please turn off the TV. Mommy is very busy today and I can't do this right now, okay? Okay, sweetheart, I need you to listen with your ears and see me with your eyes. Okay, Mommy is busy today. You have to go to school and I need you to get up and turn off that TV, and I know you can do it, okay? Yeah, you can. For real, Teal, I'm serious. Now I'm really getting upset. You need to turn off that TV. You know what? If you do not turn off that TV, I am going to ground you for 3 months. You know what? I'm going to take all your toys and I'm going to give them to the poor. You're never going to school again. Why don't you listen to me? Why doesn't anybody ever listen to me? Teal, if you turn off the TV, I'll buy you a new Lego set.
Ooh, it's a good deal.
Does that sound like good parenting to you? Well, you should go to kidsinthehouse.com where you can find more than 10,000.
Okay, you can hit it. By the way, that's not how you do it. Have you ever walked into a room and a 4-year-old is running the show? I went to meet a couple of couples some time ago, and their 4-year-old son, for an hour and a half, ran the show. Literally, I couldn't get a word in edgewise between this kid wanting this and wanting that, and the mother jumping up to do whatever the child wanted. See, parenting is something, and again, discipline, order. These are gifts. The father, he provides, he's like the rudder of the ship. The father, if you're a father about to be a father, you are the rudder. The mom is the nurturer. And you put the two together, you can do a great thing together. But you know, something happened at the end of World War II. To that point, families in this country were pretty stable. The divorce rate was very, very minimal. And then World War II happened, and the war ended. In that generation, the baby boomers, you had both parents working, the children being left at home. And what resulted with that is the chaos we have today, where you have kids that have had no parenting. We work heavily in their city. I mentor in a junior high school. And there are kids that have never met their father. They have no idea who he is. And even more so, they don't want to find out. They don't even want to talk to him. Well, where does it all begin? The key, 2 words. Can anybody guess what the 2 words are that make a family really work? What's one? It's got 4 letters. Love. What's the other one? It begins with a T. Time. Time spent. That produces what? It produces bonding. And what is bonding? Bonding is a kind of thing, and I can tell you, when I was in college and I was there during the Vietnam War and all of that kind of crazy stuff, and all of my friends were doing drugs and getting crazy. And I had more than one friend say to me, why don't you want to do this? Why don't you want to do that? And I would say, I don't want to do it because I'm not going to dishonor my parents. As crazy as my time was growing up, we had bonded because we spent time together. Time is the key to everything. If I could summarize 12 weeks tonight into one word, you want to have a child who's going to grow up and who's going to do it right, who's going to follow the Lord, who's going to take your discipline and put it into their lives, you spend time with them. Time is everything. Love covers the multitude of sin. Because you see, time and love, they're like twins. The best example we have of that, I think, in Scripture is found in Luke chapter 15. It's a story of the what? The prodigal son. Now, how many of you know that story? You've read it? About half of you. Okay, it's very simple. A father had 2 sons. And the one son decided he wanted his inheritance. So he came to the father and he said, I want what you're going to give me when you die. Basically is what he was saying. And I want to take it, I want to leave and go find life and experience it myself. And so the father did what a loving father maybe would do. He said, okay, I'm going to give you your inheritance. And so the son leaves. Before too long, he spends all of his money, like a typical college kid. He blew it on who knows what. He is living in a pigsty, eating what the pigs eat. And he suddenly realized he made a mistake. Living with the pigs wasn't all that good. And so, to make a very long story short, he decides to come back. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In that culture, for the father to be able to give the son the inheritance, he had to lay some people off. Because in those days, a man who was rich would have maybe raising sheep, or he could be raising goats or whatever. He would build a small village. And in that village would be all of his workers. So in order for the son to be given his inheritance, the father had to lay off some of his help. Think about that. They weren't too happy. Because of this greedy son, in their mind, they're losing their jobs. And so the son wants to come home. And the father realizes he sees him coming from a distance. Now here's where it gets really interesting. I'm going to need a volunteer because I can't leave this spot, I've been told. How about the two young, Kyle, where are your kids at? They're perfect. Slavik, why don't you come down? Slavik and maybe, I don't know, grab somebody with you. You can grab Victor. Victor is looking at me like, don't do this to me, so that's why you can bring Victor. Okay, I want you to get a picture. You guys can stand in front of me. Victor, you take the hammer, and Slavik, you take the pot. Okay, here's what's happening. The father sees from the distance his son coming, but he knows something has to take place because the people in the village, they're very angry. And there's a tradition in that part of the Middle East and even today. If somebody hurts you, hurts your family, or lets you down in whatever way, they can be kicked out of the village forever. And how that takes place is this. The village leader would come to the center of town. The villagers would get behind him. They'd have a giant clay pot. Victor, if you step over, or Slavik, step over here. Okay, okay. Victor next to him. What he would do, the leader of the village would come out, and before the son could get to the village, they would do something called a kazaha project. That's what they called it, where the village mayor or whomever he might be would take the hammer and he would break the pot, smash it. Really? Yeah, really. Yeah, right now.
Who's going to clean it up?
Slavik. No, hit the pot. Okay. All right. He would break the pot. That's something. You can go back, sit down. He would go back. The pot would be broken. It would be saying to all those present that man cannot come back into this village. And so the father is watching this play out. The son is coming. And he knows that he has to get to the son before the village mayor does. In that culture, if you're an older man and you are running, number one is considered very, very wrong. But the word says he went running to his son. He pulled up his tunic, which means his bare legs were showing. Those are two total taboos in the Middle East. For an old man to run, let alone have his tunic pulled up. But the father did it. He ran and took the shame to get to his son before the villagers could. He hugged him. He brought him back into the village. And of course, he honored his son. Now, the simple story is the father took shame upon himself to save his son. It's much of what Jesus did for you and I. He took the shame upon the cross that we would not suffer humiliation and death. And so in that story, we see the love of a father for his son. I'm leaving so much out. I wish I had you guys for 12 weeks. We'd really get into this. The story is very simple. That Jesus took our shame like the father, the prodigal son, how he took it. Okay, what I want to go through very quickly, what are important points by this example of it not being too late? Maybe you've had a situation where a son has gone off or a brother or a sister, not just men, and have really screwed up. How in the world do I draw that person back into a relationship? Number one, and this is really important. Number one is simply, no matter what, your child will always be your child. In other words, they're your flesh and blood. No matter what's taken place, that child will always be your child, which means that nothing can break that bond. So you can never give up and say, well, he's gone too far, she's gone too far. Secondly, there's healing power in forgiveness. Even when you are right and the person is wrong. I had somebody a long time ago that really betrayed my wife and I, and it was really a crazy situation. One of the hardest things for me to do was to go to this guy and to ask him to forgive me when I didn't do anything. But I felt the Holy Spirit say, take the upper road, the higher hand, go and ask him to forgive you for whatever you've done to make him do what he did. And so with every ounce of energy I had, putting aside my German background kind of temper, Ukrainians have tempers too, but I went to visit him. I locked at the door and he stood looking at me like, what do you want? And I said to him, I've come to ask you to forgive me for what I've apparently done to you. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean for what you've done to me? And he comes out and says it. He goes, look what I've done to you. And he burst into tears. And that day I learned something, the power of seeking forgiveness. In a marriage, it's so important. Take the higher road, even when you know you're right. Because husbands are always right. Not really. Ukrainian humor is really different. The more I'm here, I learn that. My background's Ukrainian, so I should understand a little bit. But you see, to ask forgiveness when even it's not your fault, think how many arguments that can diffuse. I could tell you hundreds of examples in my life. It's not a gimmick, but it's real. It works because it's biblical. Thirdly, relational reclamation takes time. Now, this is really important. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to it. I'm just going to read it. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. It says this, look carefully at how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. Make the best use of time, because the days are evil. The word time is very interesting in the Greek language. Actually, it's saying here, take advantage of the opportune moment. Now, there are two words for the word time that I want to examine for a second. And apply this relationally in your lives. I have people right now in my life that I'm confronting in love. I have others that are out there that I'm simply reaching out to. A guy that again, really, really hurt me and my wife a number of years ago. I've just prayed for him down through the years and waiting. And he calls me out of nowhere here 4 days ago. He said, Pastor Chuck, my wife left me. Can I talk to you? And I was kind of laughing to myself thinking, I don't believe God caused his wife to leave him to come and talk to me, but yet God can use everything. There's two words for the word time. Here it says, make use of the time. And the Greek word is chronos, K-R-A-N-O-S. And that particular kind of time, actually kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, is time that is now. It's at the moment that you know you're supposed to make a move. Second kind of time is called chronos, C-H-R-O-N-O-S. Chronos time is waiting for the right moment to move. I had a young man approach me. Actually, his brother is my best friend. Years ago, his younger brother got in a lot of trouble. And one day in a Bible study, I looked at him and I knew exactly what was wrong. Nobody would have guessed it, and in no way did he show what was wrong. But in my zeal, in my desire to want to reach out to him, it was chronos time, not kairos time. It was a time of waiting. It wasn't the right moment. And so I approached him and said what I did. And he got so angry, he started screaming at me, took off. This girl calls me, actually the girl he was dating. And she said, what did you say to John? And I said, you mean when he got mad at me and walked out screaming at me? She goes, he told me things very privately that you could have never known. But he thinks I told you. That kid to this day has not talked to me. It's been a long time ago. So kairos time is when you act at the moment, when it's the right time. In relationships, It's so important when you're reaching out, even with a child, maybe an estranged child that's been gone for a long time, and suddenly you want to reach out to that child. You have to be led by the Holy Spirit when it's the right moment, the kairos time. But the chronos time is a time of waiting. It's a time where you sit back and you have to discern what season are you in. It's important that you know which season that you're in. Is it a time of moving now or a time of waiting? In my life, there are many kairos moments right now with people where I know that I'm called to make a move. I've had some experiences here this week, one in particular, that I knew exactly what the Lord showed me to do. There are other times, people back home, that I want to say so much, but it's not the right time. So you see, when you're raising children, and for those of you that maybe you've had a son go off and do his own thing, and you want to respond and you want to do something, you got to pray for the right moment. You have to ask the Holy Spirit to show you what time is right, to discern the season of the time. Okay. It's in the desert that God can do great things relationally. Think about this. Saul, on the way to Damascus, was blinded. If you remember the story, knocked off his horse. And so he was led into Jerusalem, actually on his way to Jerusalem. He was led in, and he was prayed for by Ananias, and his eyes were opened. And the Bible says that immediately Saul went into the desert, and he stayed for 3 years. Now, a lot of Bible scholars believe that 3-year period in the desert, that Jesus came and met with Saul, and he taught him, because Paul became the greatest prolific writer in the New Testament. But it was 3 years that he was in the desert. Again, I don't want to get deep in a lot of Greek and Hebrew, but there's a very interesting Hebrew word. It's debhar, D-E-B-H-A-R. Out of that word, that one word, comes 3 words: God, to speak, and desert. In other words, it is in the desert experiences of our lives that if you're listening, God can speak to you and he can help you. And I'm talking about for those of you that have fathers that have been detached from you, or mothers, or people in your family that have really hurt you, and the Lord's prodding you to get involved in their lives. You begin to pray for that right moment. But oftentimes it'll be like while you're waiting, while you're getting prepared, that God can take and speak to you. And I don't believe that you're called to fear the desert, because in the desert that God can speak and do great things. Okay. Number 4, you must learn to be a good listener. That's so important. When you're raising children, you have to learn to be able to listen, because if you don't, you can lose them. I heard an interesting story a while back. Actually, I observed this more than I heard it. I went into home to meet with a guy, and his son came running in from school. He's like a 5th grader. He's going, Daddy, Daddy, I had the most incredible day. And the father is talking to me while he's on the cell phone at the same time, which to me, that's rude. He wanted to talk to me about what was happening in his life, and so he's talking to me and talking to his cell phone. It just didn't make sense. Well, now enters the son. And the son goes, Daddy, I want to tell you about today. He goes, yeah, son, what happened? He's talking on his phone. And the son looked at him and goes, no, Daddy, you don't understand. Something really good happened today. And his dad goes, what happened? And then he turns and goes back to his phone. It was like an arrow shot to that kid's heart. I saw the look on his face. I saw him walk away and go back into his room. That father had no idea at that moment he had spoke death to his son. And those things can carry into later years. So you've got to be a good listener. Love must be consistent. If you're trying to win back somebody, and say you've screwed up, and this is again for older parents and for about to be parents that you don't do this, but it's not just being a good listener, but it's about being consistent. Because see, if you've blown it consistently and your child's walked away from you, and you try all of a sudden want to be buddy-buddy. I had this guy in my office. He's going, I hadn't seen my son in 10 years, and I invited him out for lunch, and he said no, and he cussed me out. And he goes, what did I do wrong? I said, 10 years of not spending time with your son, for starters. He goes, well, I'm reaching out and she understands. It's not that way. Love has to be consistent. Again, I could tell stories all day long. I'm trying to concise, Lord, what do you want me to say here? I got all this material. Let me give you another example. This one kid drove me crazy, a high school kid. And for at least 11 months, put this way, he's lucky he's still alive. And so this one day, after about 11 months, he walks in my office, knocks on my door, and I open the door, and there he is. And I wanted to say, like, what do you want? And so I bit my tongue, and I go, hi, John, what's up? And he goes, I want to shake your hand. And I didn't want to shake his hand. If I didn't stick my hand, I go, stick your hand out. So I did. He just grabs me, gives me this big bear hug, starts crying uncontrollably on my shoulder. He said, I put you through blank, 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 blank for the last 11 months. And he said, you didn't give up on me. And again, it's not that I'm this saint. He's lucky he didn't get punched. Put it kind of bluntly, that's how I felt. But he said, you didn't give up on me. And I just stood there. You see, love has to be consistent. If you're trying to win somebody back, if you want to keep somebody, bonding, I mentioned earlier, is so important. And bonding is simply spending time together. I'll get into that here in a minute. Handling rejection is important. If somebody that you're reaching out to that's been part of your life for a long time and then they're gone and there've been all these problems, they might initially reject you for a good period of time, but you keep coming back at them. Just keep trying. You keep trying. And then finally one day the person will go, wow, that person really does care and he really loves me. Praying for an open door. Praying for an open door. Oftentimes I think we make a move and we do it simply because we think in our flesh it's the right time. Those of you that aren't parents yet, these are all little tidbits that if you can just begin to remember and think about it. What I just said was this, like concise it. Your child will always be your child. No matter what, that's your flesh and blood. So you never give up. Number 2, the power of asking forgiveness. Don't be afraid to say you're sorry, even when you're right. In a situation, is it Kairos time? Is it time to act? Or is it Chronos time? A time to wait and ask God to show you how to act. Because you see, when you make a move in somebody's life, you got to be sure it's the Holy Spirit. I've blown it so many times with people that I moved too soon. And so after about the 20th time, it got through my thick head that you don't do it this way, and I learned the hard way. Be a good listener. Be consistent in your love. Don't be afraid of being rejected. Pray for an open door. Okay, I want to move on to another topic. The most important person in my life, my dad. Now, that doesn't mean the moms aren't important. You're equally important. But in what I'm talking about in my book, I'm particularly directing at dads. Because you are the rudder of the boat. So for those of you that are about to be fathers, this is so important. A baseball player, Harmon Killebrew, once said this. My father used to play with my brother and me in the yard. Mother would come out and say, you're tearing up the grass. What are you doing? We're not raising grass, my dad would reply. We're raising kids. I'll never forget in my childhood, when I was about maybe 8 or 9, maybe 10 years of age. Every night my dad would promise to take me somewhere. And every night I would sit by the front room window, waiting for my dad to come home. And usually after about an hour and a half, I would give up and I would just go to bed. In the other bedroom, my mom would be crying. And I didn't know what was happening with them or what my dad was doing at the time. Night after night, week after week, I would wait. My dad would say, I'll get you at 7 o'clock after work and we're going to go to a hockey game. I didn't even know what hockey was at that time. So after a period of time, I would just give up and I'd go to bed. Now we go a number of years forward. Not so long ago, I was driving past my old street. There was the same house. There was the same bay window. And I looked at the window, and all of a sudden, a rush of memories hit me. I was in the middle of 3 lanes of traffic, and I began to cry so hard that I couldn't see anything. And I'm weaving between cars that I can't see. And it had to be an angel directing my car because I made it to the side of the road where for about 5 minutes I just sat there and cried. And I realized the pain that was buried that I'd never dealt with. You see, it's not that my dad didn't love me. It's that my dad didn't know how to love me. My grandpa was more like my dad than my dad was. But when I was a young kid, as much as I loved my grandpa, I wanted my dad to tell me what was right and wrong. Even almost doing things wrong, so my dad would care enough to punish me. If that sounds weird. And he wouldn't even do it then. You see, World War II really messed him up, and my grandma told me he came home, and he was very, very injured. Well, so what does the best friend, father, hero look like? I love a quote that either I came up with or I read it somewhere, I forget after a while. But a father is a daughter's first love and a son's first best friend. Think about that. My daughter and I used to go out on dates when she's like 5, 6, up until we still go out, do stuff together. My first child was a girl, and the other 2 after were boys. And so bad, I decided I want to make my daughter into a tomboy. And so, at 4th grade level, I took her to a doubleheader baseball game in Cleveland. It rained, it snowed, hail, lightning, 2 games, 7 hours. She stayed under the seat, wouldn't even come out. To this day, I can't get her to do anything, go to any game anywhere with me. We often laughed about that because she ended up being a cheerleader, and now she's a master makeup artist in this company she works for. She's anything but a tomboy. But then God blessed me with 2 boys that both turned out to be super athletes, another whole story. But you know, I look back on those times. Dads, your daughter, you'll be her first love. And think about that, what that means. I will never forget when my daughter got married. Her husband, who's about 6'4", 275, a walk-on at Ohio State, playing ball until he got hurt. I'm in my office before church. He comes walking in, and they had been dating for maybe a year. And he goes, can I talk to you a second? There's this great big guy, and he's shaking like this. I go, oh my God, what is he going to say? And he said, can I ask you a question? Can I marry your daughter? Like that. And I started laughing because I knew this has got to be what it is. And I said, Cliff, having you in the family will be a blessing of blessings. There's nothing more than being a bodyguard. He was perfect. I said, I want you in our family. I'd love to have you in our family. I go, when do you want to ask her? And he said, well, I've got the ring, but I don't know when to do it. I go, where's the ring at? He had it in his pocket. I go, let's do it right now. So we opened the service after a praise song. I walked out front, and I said, Cliff, will you come down here? And the church, people knew this was going to be coming. I heard my daughter, she goes, like that, and you could hear it in the whole church. He comes down, I called her down. He knelt on his knee and looked up at her and said, Gracie, will you marry me? Actually, Sarah at that time. Now she goes by her middle name. And the church thunders applause for like 5 minutes. It was one of the most impacting moments of my life. Build memories. And you don't have to wait. Psychology will tell you, even in the womb, a child will know touch. You know, I can't ever remember my parents hugging each other and saying, I love you. I never saw it. And it really impacted me later in my life. I didn't know how to show affection because it wasn't modeled before me. So how does this father become his son's hero and his daughter's first love? Number one, the father is his role to establish in the home the sacredness of God in the church. In other words, you set the example spiritually. It's not about just praying over the food. but it's about making time that matters. I'm sure same out here, but our Sunday mornings now are packed out with soccer and every sport you can imagine right at church time. I'm a sports freak, and my kids are in everything. If I wanted to, I could be at a soccer, basketball game. I go down the list every night of the week, double, going somewhere. But you know, those things are great, but not at Sunday morning. Because when you take and give up the time of your family being together in church, you know what you're saying to your child? You're saying church really isn't important. It fits in with soccer, basketball, volleyball. The Father sets the tone. I'm not talking about a rigidity where you pound your fist on the table and your kids have to go to church. Heck, our kids, we had boundaries. Our kids came to church. But youth group, other activities, we never forced them. We never forced our daughter, our oldest, ever to go to youth group. You know what happened? My daughter, by her junior year, was bringing between 40 and 50 young people to youth group every Wednesday night. We had a group about maybe 300 kids, and probably a third of those my daughter was bringing. We never forced her. It happened automatically. See, when you model principles that your kids can see being lived out consistently every day, they pick them up. You talk about the issue of time. I read this recently. It really struck my heart. A young boy, about 10 years old, went to his father and he said, "Daddy, how much money do you make an hour?" And the guy told him. And he said, "If I work hard enough and save up, buy an hour of your time." 10-year-old kid saying that to his father. Just recently in a grocery store, he said, our words are meant to speak life and not death. In a grocery store, a grandfather had his 2 grandsons, and they were really acting up. A friend of mine watched this whole thing. Boys are about 7 or 8 years old, and they were typically boys. They were fighting, knocking stuff off the shelves a little bit. Grandpa goes over and he said, "I am so ashamed of you that I wish you weren't my grandsons." Out of a fit of anger, he said that. Now, I can tell you this, and it's true. In the Hebrew language, they believe that a word spoken, it carries life or it carries death. You be careful what you speak, not just your child, to anyone. Because those words, like what happened to me when my dad would never show up, those things carry over far, far beyond what we can ever imagine. So the Father plays a spiritual role. Number 2, and this is really important, no matter how many kids you have, you must model to your kids that your mom, their mom, his wife, your wife, comes first. Your wife comes first. Your kids come second. It's God, his family, and his church. Church is always third. You see, I remember back in the day when my sons, we moved to a different city, and they were placed on this baseball team that had won 2 games in maybe 5 years. They were horrible. These kids couldn't hit a baseball if you gave them a snow shovel that wide. And so nobody would coach the team, and I said, "Well, I'll take it over." Didn't know what I was getting into, but I had 15 boys. They'd been yelled at, screamed at, told they're never going to amount to anything sports-wise. They're terrible athletes. They had a coach that, he was horrible in the words that he spoke into their lives. I just began to love them where they were at. I mean, a kid would strike out 4 times, I'd try to find something good. "Hey, you're swinging better. You only missed by 2 feet instead of maybe 4. You know what happened? That team that had won 2 games in 3 years, the following year, after we were together, we went like 18-2, got in the playoffs, and nearly made it into the state championship games. We were the talk of Suffield, of our town. And so the coach they had previously, who had a big mouth and cussing at these kids, he stopped me in a store one day. He goes, "Everybody's talking about your team. What did you do to make those kids get so good?" I was waiting for this opportunity. I said, "Oh, I can tell you really easy. I didn't cuss at them. I didn't tell them how horrible they were. I didn't tell them what rotten athletes they were going to become. I had about 4 or 5 more little cute things that I said. He just looked at me and said, okay, and he walked away. But you see, those words produce life. And so it's so important, though, as a husband, that your wife comes first. Thirdly, I've mentioned a lot about spending quality time. That time is the most important thing that you can do with a child to allow them to adapt to who you are. Because you see, if your child is raised in a secure environment, I've seen kids that they hide in corners, they won't talk, they're reclusive. And I've had parents say, what's wrong with my daughter? She's 11 and she won't make friends and she doesn't like going here or going there. First question I ask is, where's the dad? Most times the dad hasn't been there. Second question is, how much time do you spend with your child? And you have mothers working 2 and 3 jobs. I mean, what can they do? So you get the picture. Thirdly, this is important. Neither money nor things can replace the gift of spending quality time, especially during developmental years. Because you see, around the age of birth to about 6, a kid's identity is really shaped and formed. I encourage you, those of you that have wives that are pregnant, pray over your child. Place your hands upon the stomach and pray. Psychology says that child will understand and know in a different kind of way, but they'll sense love. That's crazy, but it's true. I had an amazing thing happen in Israel a while back. Israel's like my second home, and I've been blessed to be there, and I've seen and learned so much of what I know from being there. But a buddy of mine had a Jeep, and we're out in the desert baahaing. And by baahaing, I mean I learned how to pray a whole new way riding with him. Kind of like riding with some other people that are here tonight that I ride around with. I learned to pray doubly hard. We're out in the desert when we're going over these mounds of sand, and I swear I broke my back 3 times. All of a sudden, a shepherd came over a ridge, and he had maybe 5 or 10 sheep with him. And for whatever reason, the 23rd Psalm came to my mind. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He restoreth my soul. The last part of that verse really hit me. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Your rod and your staff, they will comfort me. Well, I knew what the staff was for. And I see out in the desert at nighttime, the shepherd will take and build a lean-to. He'll put 3 walls, then he will sleep at the entrance, put the sheep inside. Because there are wild animals in the desert. But I wonder, what in the world is that rod for? I asked my buddy, I go, explain to me about the shepherd and the rod. He goes, very simple. In the ancient of days, and even some places today, when a lamb is born, the shepherd will take that rod and he'll break the back 2 legs of the lamb. So the lamb can't walk. And he will carry the lamb around his neck for approximately 6 weeks until those legs are healed and the lamb could walk. Well, why would he do that? 2 reasons. The lamb would learn during those 6 weeks to hear the voice of the shepherd and to know his heart. That might sound like, what does that mean? When you're raising a child, the time that you spend, the bonding that takes place between 1 and 5, is that period of time where he will learn your heart, who you are, by sensing your love and by the words of tenderness that you speak. So these are all challenges that, again, I could just go on and on. The 23rd Psalm spoke to me in a way that I'd never heard it before. When I was out with that guy we were Bahan, the Lord spoke this to my heart. We cannot make our children into what we think they should be spiritually, but we can shape their futures and destinies by the sacrifice of our time. Such sacrifice involves a heart-to-heart relationship which will prepare their hearts to hear my voice. So, our words, our acts of love are so important. I had a gentleman and his wife come in to see me for marriage counseling. And they were 85 years old. And they wanted marriage counseling. And I thought to myself, if you don't have it figured out by the time you're 85, you're in big trouble. And so they sit down. I'm trying to be serious. And I said, "Ma'am, what's the problem?" And she said, "He never tells me that he loves me." I looked at him, I go, "Is that true?" And he goes, "The night we got married, I told her I loved her, and I told her if that's not good enough, then what else is? I'm not saying anymore." And she said, "See what I mean?" Well, we had an interesting talk. I could go on for a long time about that. But I'll never forget. You see, God's love is meant to be shared by our words, by our deeds, by our attitudes. Love can never be legalistic. You see, the trouble with the church today, we've turned the love of Jesus into a bunch of rules and regulations, where authenticity, reality, seemingly is left out. I spoke at a Christian high school some time ago, and these kids are looking at me like they didn't want to hear a word I had to say. They didn't want to be there. This is a Christian high school. So I thought walking in there, these kids are going to be on fire, and oh, here we go. So after about 3 or 4 minutes, I wasn't getting anywhere. So I go, "Okay, how many don't want to be in here?" 28 of the 31 hands went up. So I knew I was in big trouble. So I put down what the school wanted me to speak on, kind of, just started telling my stories. The kids responded because it was authentic. It wasn't fabricated. It wasn't part of our curriculum. You see, oftentimes, we take and treat our children to protect them from what we went through. There's a couple I know right now. They have 5 kids. And I'm just getting to know them. But I'm finding out they have their 5 kids on a farm out in the country. They raise chickens and cows and whatever. But I was talking to the one kid in church, and I mentioned about going to McDonald's and getting something, whatever. I don't know how it came up. He goes, "I've never been there." And I said, "What do you mean you've never been there?" He said, "Well," he goes, "we're not allowed to leave the compound kind of thing, which is the home." And I go, "What?" He'd never been to McDonald's. He'd never been any place really outside of that compound coming to church. Now, here's what I found out in many cases like that. I have a lot of friends that were drug dealers, who were crazy people. Heck, we had everything imaginable living with us. We had a young lady that we thought was a lady, but she was really a he going through a sex change, and we had no idea. She could hit the softball farther on our girls' team than any guy on the guys' team. That should have been kind of maybe an inclination, something's going on here. But she had been beat up by the church, and what led her to do what she was doing, who knows? I don't know. But oftentimes I found this to be true, is that, as one parent put it, I smoked dope all my life as an adult, and my kids are not going to do the same thing. I'm going to protect them that they don't make the same mistake. You cannot legislate spirituality. You cannot put your kids in a box and expect them to be what you want them to be. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it." Well, I was taught back in the days in the Catholic Church and Methodist, to train up a child meant get out the whip, the ruler, and let them have it. You beat on them a little bit. You make them do what they're supposed to do. It's not what that means at all in the Hebrew language. The word train up a child in the way they should go, what it says is come alongside of your child, find out where he's gifted or she's gifted, and walk with them. I had a buddy of mine who prayed to have a son, and he had a daughter. Well, his daughter wanted to be a cheerleader. He goes, "What do I do? I want a football player, and I've got a cheerleader, 5 years age." I go, "You go to her tryouts, you show up when she cheers, and you be her biggest champion." And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh," like a light went off. Train up a child, find out where they're gifted, support their giftings, walk alongside, encourage them to be what they're called to be. You see, you cannot legislate Jesus Christ. The Bible is so clear this about relationship, not about religion. I am not religious at all. I don't like the word religion. Because to me, religion speaks of a lot of death, a lot of do's and don'ts. And of course, there are rules, there are regulations we have to follow. But what brought me to Jesus was there were people who told me that I could change, that love could be more than just conditional, that I could meet people that loved me for who I was. Remember a time I went to a church some time ago, visiting with a friend. A young man with hair down to here. He had a nose piercing. He smelled. And he wasn't walking too straight. I think he was probably high. At the altar call, he came down to the front to receive prayer. And the pastor looked down at him. One of the deacons came running down the aisle, grabbed him by the hair, pulled him up. He said, "You go home, take a bath, then come back and we'll talk to you." I was so mad. I got up, I looked at him, and I said, "I'm out of here." I said, "That's not the Jesus I know." After I left, my son called me. And this is where in our culture today, it gets tough. The young man came in with his boyfriend. A guy pulled into our parking lot 2 weeks ago. I wasn't there. We talked to one of our deacons. He said, "Am I welcome at church here?" And the deacon said, "Of course you are." The deacon's an older guy, so he's kind of like, the old way. And he goes, "Well, I'm going through a sex change. Can I come to church here?" And I'm proud of him. He said, "You're more than welcome." The average person would go, "No, we don't want you here." The question is, what would Jesus do? Who did Jesus hang out with? Who did Jesus love? He loved the unlovely. And my son told this couple, and again, we don't compromise the truth. We believe what we believe. He said, "You are more than welcome here." Our philosophy is that if the Jesus we believe in will draw somebody, he's big enough to bring healing where healing is needed. I had a young man sometime recently who had been raped at the age of 9. And he was totally convinced that he was homosexual. And so I sat down with him and I said to him, I go, "So tell me why you think you are." And he told me what happened to him. I asked him, "How much did you weigh?" And he said, "Well, at the time, probably 70 pounds. "How big was the guy that did this to you?" And he goes, "Over 200 pounds. And I said to him, I go, "Could you have stopped him?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "So then why do you think that you're struggling in this area?" He goes, "I don't know. Maybe because I didn't stop him, but I couldn't stop him." He starts talking to himself. Before he walked out of there that night, we had a bunch of things straightened out. But you see, we have to be willing in this culture to go that extra length to see. Okay, it's getting late and I have kids. I can see out here what's going on. I want to close this way. So much more I want to say. 3 things. Fathers, be Jesus to your son. Let him from a small young age see who Jesus is by seeing him in you. You do that, your son will not betray you with drugs, with alcohol. Like I told my friends, I would never hurt my parents by doing what you're doing. Because at a young age we bonded in the midst of all the fighting and stuff that went on. Another area that I was going to talk about is family traditions. It's so important. Have your own traditions. We have a bunch of them. Family vacation. You know the most important family tradition, I believe? Anybody, can you guess what it might be? It's called the dinner table. In America, it's non-existent today. That's what I love about going to Ukraine, to Armenia. Every Sunday, everybody comes together. I grew up that way with my Austrian, Hungarian, Ukrainian, Russian grandmother. The borders changed so many times, I can't figure out. I'm a mutt, like 5 different nationalities. But every Sunday we got together. And I remember to this day the love that I felt around that table. Tremendous family tradition. I want to do 2 things to close with. I want you to watch a video, George, wherever you're back there, the one on the Father's love. I want you to watch this. And again, I've got some of the books. I'm not here to sell books, believe me. I knew this was going to happen because I had too much material, but I've only given you a smattering of different thoughts. and I didn't even do what I was going to do. But I've got like 7 copies. That's not the issue. The important thing is that I pray for you tonight that you will trust God to treat your child and the children to come in a godly manner. Husbands, your wife is first. Wife, you're the nurturer. You're the glue that holds it together. The husband, you're called to give that direction. But this video touches upon that. Okay, George.
The words you are about to experience are true. They will change your life if you let them. For they come from the very heart of God. He loves you, and He is the Father you have been looking for all your life. This is His love letter to you. My child, you may not know me, but I know everything about you. I know when you sit down and when you rise up. I am familiar with all your ways. Even the very hairs on your head are numbered, for you were made in my image. In me you live and move and have your being. For you are my offspring. I knew you even before you were conceived. I chose you when I planned creation. You were not a mistake. For all your days are written in my book. I determined the exact time of your birth and where you would live. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. I knit you together in your mother's womb and brought you forth on the day you were born. I have been misrepresented by those who don't know me. I am not distant and angry, but am the complete expression of love. And it is my desire to lavish my love on you, simply because you are my child and I am your father. I offer you more than your earthly father ever could, for I am the perfect father. Every good gift that you receive comes from my hand, for I am your provider and I meet all your needs. My plan for your future has always been filled with hope, because I love you with an everlasting love. My thoughts toward you are countless as the sand on the seashore, and I rejoice over you with singing. I will never stop doing good to you, for you are my treasured possession. I desire to establish you with all my heart and all my soul, and I want to show you great and marvelous things. If you seek me with all your heart, you will find me. Delight in me, and I will give you the desires of your heart, for it is I who gave you those desires. I am able to do more for you than you could possibly imagine, for I am your greatest encourager. I am also the Father who comforts you in all your troubles. When you are brokenhearted, I am close to you. As a shepherd carries a lamb, I have carried you close to my heart. One day, I will wipe away every tear from your eyes, and I'll take away all the pain you have suffered on this earth. I am your Father, and I love you even as I love my Son Jesus. For in Jesus my love for you is revealed. He is the exact representation of my being. He came to demonstrate that I am for you, not against you, and to tell you that I am not counting your sins. Jesus died so that you and I could be reconciled. His death was the ultimate expression of my love for you. I gave up everything I loved that I might gain your love. If you receive the gift of my son Jesus, you receive me. And nothing will ever separate you from my love again. Come home and I'll throw the biggest party heaven has ever seen. I have always been Father, and will always be Father. My question is, will you be my child? I am waiting for you. Love, your dad, Almighty God.
Will you all stand with me? 1995, my daughter was going to school in Sydney, Australia, and I went down for a conference. My life was broken in many ways, some pretty heavy things that happened in my life. And I was crying out, Father, where are you? I know you're there, but I don't feel you. And this church sang this song, My Redeemer Lives, back there, George. And I want to, tonight as we close, make this a prayer over you. It's a song of celebration. Because you see, the power of praise breaks the yoke of the enemy. So wherever you're at tonight in your relationship with your children, whatever you're feeling in your life, you need more of him. Our Redeemer lives. And this song that night broke in me the pain that I was feeling. And so every time since then, when I'm in a situation like this, I like to close with this song as a blessing over you. A few of you will know what I think.